Ready when you are.
Postcards, progeny and parasites, all in this 26th I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that's only qualified to work on sailors, with your hosts John West,
Jim Hall,
and Matt Needer. Tonight, the Fourth Doctor, Harry and Sarah discover that in the far future, humanity will have been all but wiped out by flares, including the shocking bell-bottom sported by Earth's last survivors, as they face a chatty wasp aboard the Ark in space.
Its title hinted at a continuity barnstormer that would forever change the show and its lead character. Instead, audiences faced a clumsy rabble of bong-smoking pilchard men in boiler suits. Well, at least David Tennant got something out of The Doctor's Daughter.
And in a hectic airport, the Second Doctor and Jamie encounter what at first glance looks like a normal person, but whose weird speech pattern suggests it's something not quite human. Pauline Collins plays the wacky Scouser in 1967 mystery The Faceless Ones.
Hi, welcome to September. Thanks, as always, for downloading.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are we doing?
Well, I think we're all right.
Good,
September.
Getting into autumn.
Yeah, getting chilly.
We're going straight back to 1975 for Tom Baker's second story.
Yep.
And kind of officially is the first of the Hinchcliffe era, which
Yep.
we'll come on to. The Ark in Space. So, following a global disaster in the far future, the Fourth Doctor, Sarah Jane and Harry land on a space station holding the frozen survivors of Earth. While humanity's been sleeping, parasitic race the Wirren have infiltrated and used the Ark as their larder, absorbed much of mankind's knowledge, and now threaten to wipe out what's left of the human race. Tom Baker's second story, the first Hinchcliffe one to be aired. I think it's fair to say pretty much regarded as a stone-cold classic.
Yeah.
But if anyone's going to dispute that, it's going to be John West. What have you got to say about this, John?
It's interesting because last month we discussed The Sunmakers.
Somewhat further along Tom Baker's.
Yes.
Yeah, which is, a couple of years into his run. So that was 77, this is January to February 75. As you say, the second story. It's fascinating to compare the two because I feel that everything that goes wrong in The Sunmakers goes right here. So in The Sunmakers, he's thrown into a strange environment. He's got to work out what's going on, and there's a bit of sci-fi business, and there's etc. etc. Here, it's a similar setup. He emerges into a space with his companions. He's got to figure out what's going on. So superficially, it seems the same. There's even sort of people wandering around in pale-coloured uniforms, signifying they're in the future.
Tannoy announcements.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's that similarity. But here, everything is just bolted on perfectly. Thematically, it is consistent. It is coherent. We have a really good TARDIS team here. Harry doesn't feel exactly fully formed, but his bumbling, posho sort of old man, old girl stuff is nice. Sarah Jane obviously is a fully formed character by this point, and her they're still having a go at her repeatedly for sort of her women's lib style things, but she's definitely her own person and has will of her own, and it's quite nice when the Doctor sort of says, "Oh, you're so lazy. I should have known that you'd not get through it." And she's, "Oh, for God's sake!" and blasts through the tunnel.
He's trying to cattle pod her along.
Yeah, exactly, and it works.
It's a reverse psychology thing.
Yeah, and then when she gets through the other side, and he says, "I'm very proud of you, Sarah Jane. I really am." It's such a touching little moment. There's lovely little bits with the Doctor, where he says about his scarf having been knitted by Madame Nostradamus, a witty little knitter.
That's such a nice line.
So it's a good line, and he's got the cricket ball which they throw up in the air and gets splattered by the arc,
the intruder ray,
intruder ray thing. And so what I mean is though that there's that humour which we think becomes very self-indulgent later on, but here it's just peppered through in a really nice way. He's just this bohemian character. Even his costume is better in these early ones, I think, than later on. It
looks a bit more just thrown together as opposed to
it just looks like a thrown together bohemian rather than it being a costume.
Yes.
Yeah, I just thought it was really good.
Yeah, and this
really,
and The Sunmakers both written by Robert Holmes.
Yeah.
So as you say, there is that similarity in the futuristic setup and slightly antiseptic society.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that typical sort of Robert Holmes world building stuff where they use subtly different vocabulary. It's clearly quite it's very interesting thematically, actually, because when he sees the fact that the human race has obviously faced a cataclysm and they've frozen themselves to preserve the human race, and he looks around and says, "Isn't it marvelous? Every creed, every color, and all that sort of thing." And it's clearly not that, because when they start thawing them, and they're clearly quite nasty little eugenicists.
It's Margot and Jerry from A Good Life.
But that Noah comes out of hibernation and says, "Oh, we don't want them mucking up our gene pool, so we'll probably kill them." And actually, it seems that far from being this inclusive idea of a sort of an arc where it's 2x2 of every type of person, in fact, it seems to have been a very ruthlessly selected group of people, and it feels quite nasty at that point. You lose a lot of sympathy for them. Yeah, I think it's very well balanced.
Matt, were you familiar with this already?
Yes, I'd seen it once before, like years ago, and my memories of it were somewhat hazy. I mean, I just have to throw my lot in with the majority on this, that I think this is fantastic. I think this is really good. One of the things I like about it, and I think it's interesting, because obviously you mentioned this is the first, certainly as broadcast, the first Philip Hinchcliffe Robert Holmes story. Tom Baker's first story, the previous story, Robot, was basically the last thing by the outgoing Pertwee team.
Yeah, and felt like it as well.
And felt like it, yes. It's very much, it's a Pertwee run around with Unit and the Brigadier, but with Tom Baker playing the lead.
How did that happen, by the way? It seems strange.
Yeah, I think it was just so they had one in the can, really, because it was a whole new production team coming on board. So Barry Letts and Terence Dix.
Because it was Barry Letts who cast Tom Baker as well. It's worth remembering. It's interesting, even though we associate him much more with other creatives on the show. But what this reminds me of, I think, is perhaps later stories where you've got a new creative team involved, thinking perhaps The Leisure Hive to an extent, although I sort of said not really as successful as this, but also something like The 11th Hour, where you've got the new team just really tearing out the gate, obviously with their best material, but also I think with a real energy in trying to display that there's something new going on here. And I think it's weird, the special effects on this are not brilliant, but I would say that almost every aspect of how the production is realised means that at the very least you don't notice, and at best they work brilliantly. That opening model shot of the Ark just sailing past, and it's silent. All the space shots are silent.
It's a really interesting creative choice, isn't it?
It's a realistic choice, but also
it is.
But it's very startling, and I think of other things that have done that. Whereas, obviously in Star Trek and Star Wars, you have the craft screaming past as they go by, engines roaring. Whereas I'm thinking, obviously we'll come on to Alien in a bit, but Alien and 2001, where everything's moving very silently. It's a very deliberate choice. That you have that amazing shot of the Ark going past. Something happens with
we get a point of view.
We get a point of view shot of something bad happening, and then the Ark just sails silently on. And there's a real. It's not just a cut. There's a real slow fade out. It's such a sinister opening.
Yeah, it's really sinister, very atmospheric.
And then
we're
gets
past the fact that the model shots itself not.
Yeah, but you don't mind because it's so well directed. Yeah. That's the thing. Yes, obviously it's been made out of washing up bottles and toilet tubes, but you absolutely don't notice because the direction and the lighting and sound and camera work choices are so striking.
And the dropping in, the phasing in of that point of view shot, which you don't even find out what that means till episode 4, is it?
No, it's exactly
so
it's some kind of weird.
When he does the mind link with the piece of latex rubber, in order to work out, and that's what we see. We see that's the Wirren arriving from space. I think, and then it's all killer. I think the pace does not let up on this, and I think it's consistently taut throughout. But the pacing is absolutely magnificent. It's very deliberately paced. There's never a sense of frantic urgency to the first episode. It's a very measured setting up of problems and mysteries for the TARDIS
mounting
crew.
Fear as well.
Yeah, and mounting fear
claustrophobic.
It's just one thing gently after another, but it plotted so rhythmically and methodically. that, yes, just that rising dread in the first episode is something else. Plus, it's an extraordinary performance from Tom Baker. You know, he's playing it totally on the leash. He's doing exactly what has been delivered on the page, but he imbues almost every word with such like copper-bottomed intensity. You know, we were saying that was always one thing that we really enjoyed about the Pertwee performance, which, you know, obviously I love the Third Doctor, and Pertwee means every word of it. He really commits to it. Baker's going even 50% more than that. It's like every word is imbued with such meaning as it comes out of his mouth and intensity that, you know, he really anchors the whole thing together. I mean, it's fantastic performances throughout, but as the gravitational pull at the centre of it, he's astonishing, and you realize what a bold, imaginative bit of casting that was.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic in it, and the whole adventure is really. But I mean, yeah, it's such a contrast with the Sunmakers when he was off the leash, and here the bit that I always love is it's very early on. It's the double act with him and Ian Marter as Harry.
Yeah.
And I think the Doctor's explaining, this is like 50,000 years in the future or something. And Ian Marter says, that can't be right. He says, what, you don't agree? As if Harry's also some expert on the future of Earth's history and stuff. No, it's a great setup. You can see, I mean, sometimes we as fans, not just us, fans generally, can spend too much time taking these things to pieces, but it is great to look at this, take it to pieces, and see it's Robert Holmes, who's already a very experienced scriptwriter, knows what the show can and can't do. And here his first job as script editor is doing this thing where, as you say, the first episode is so great, claustrophobic, mountain terror. It gets to showcase the new team, the new leading man. Philip Hinchcliffe, as producer, famously decided, hold on, we've got 2 stories this season on a space station, so maybe let's build one really good space station, split the cost over 2 stories. And Revenge of the Cybermen is just as popular. But this is it.
And it's meant to be the same space station as well, isn't it?
There's a reason for that, yeah. But no, the set looks great. Roger Murray Leach. The whole stuff with the people in storage, which is used very cleverly with mirrors and stuff, looks absolutely fantastic.
It's their mirror work to double those up.
Yeah.
Because that's really extraordinary. We haven't seen a set as beautiful as, I mean, obviously you take him back to Tomb of the Cybermen, which isn't a good serial but has a great bit of design work there. I mean, it's as good as that. It feels so. There are serials that are made 10, almost 14 years later that don't look as good as this. This looks really like there has been a lot of effort here to design it, to make it look good, to make it coherent.
But also very economically. I mean, really, it's a drama that takes place only in a handful of rooms.
Yeah.
But even things like that corridor between the various rooms, which has got the glass panels above and below and just the walkway, but looking out onto the
curves
and the stars.
If you saw the extra on the DVD, but it cuts off just after the corner.
Right.
Yeah. But they get maximum use from it.
They really do. It's
and they shoot it from, like, because the director was Rodney Bennett. Mm-hmm. And there's loads of really good stuff. Like when they're on that corridor, there's really good low shots looking up, so you get the full sense of the space. The stuff in the sort of energy stack area, which is so dark and mysterious, and you don't know what's there, and there's the green pulsing stuff. I mean, the amount of bubble wrap that was harmed in the making of this. But you know,
several trips to the post office.
But you know what? That's the thing, and you mentioned this already with the images of the space station. When there's dramatic purpose and it's illustrative, obviously this isn't as much money as a big feature film or a 2001 or a Star Wars or whatever, but when there is dramatic intent and good execution, good performances, and the design is good, even if the it's
materials
relatively
are
cheap.
Obvious is basically what you're saying. Yeah,
it all just fits. You completely forgive or forget the limitations of it because it just clicks, and this really clicks. This is a production team that's firing on all cylinders, and again, it's so illustrative to compare it to Sunmakers, which we covered last month, where it just feels that everyone's off the boil.
Yeah, and I think there's no that sort of moment, of what you were saying about how it's obviously bubble wrap, but for some reason you're so held in the moment with this. I think is the bit where Noah is starting to mutate whilst they play the pre-recorded message from the High Minister of Earth, doing her very high-minded, you carry all the hopes and ideals of humanity and all that kind of thing. And
which ends up counting dramatically as well, because in the end, Noah, his humanity wins out.
Exactly. Yeah. To all intents and purposes, the scene that is being played out under that is a man with some green bubble wrap wrapped around his hand, like wrestling
doing his little Doctor
with it.
Strangelove.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he commits to it. It's an extraordinary performance from Kenton Moore as Noah. But I mean, he and Rodney Bennett have committed to that and the aesthetic of that scene so 100%. That, I mean, I totally, even though I can see it's a man with bubble wrap around his hand, I totally bought into that.
And that marbles through the whole story as well, because the Wirren who, as a kid, looked good in photographs
yes,
and illustrations in monster books and stuff, probably because they're so inhuman.
Yeah.
I think as a kid, you're thinking,
that's
not a man in a suit. And then when you watch it, it is a man in a suit. So again, they're a nice design, but not a very convincing prop. But the idea of them is so horrible.
Yes, yeah, and that's the thing. On every level, the script, the performances, the direction commit to it.
Yeah,
it really makes you believe, and then you realise that obviously we love Doctor Who, warts and all, but there are plenty of moments where, for whatever reason, you don't buy into it or you don't believe because the production values let it down. You realise that actually, what we always like to think as fans actually is true, that there are some moments where the series really does get it together to such an extent that you believe, and I 100% believe in this. I think it's wonderful.
This is a real move on. As much as we love Pertwee, it's a complete paradigm shift, isn't it?
Totally.
I mean, there's all the stuff that Pertwee left because everyone else was leaving and said he would have stayed if they paid him a bit more, which a few of the people have disputed. It might have been a way of saving face almost for him. It would have been interesting. I mean, one of my problems with the Third Doctor era, which I do love, but I feel he didn't have enough adventures out into space, and this feels like, again, as you were saying, like a statement of intent by the production team that this is what we're going to be doing now. We're not going to be staying on Earth and doing unit stories. Even though Pertwee did go off
mention
to
of the Brigadier at the end is quite a jolt, actually, when Harry says, I did tell the Brigadier I'd look out for you.
Yeah.
You think, oh yeah, that was only a few weeks earlier that was what Doctor Who was.
It's such a shift on from the Pertwee era. Even though he did have a few adventures in space, they weren't like this. And the Barry Letts concerns about ecology and Buddhism and things, this just seems right down to body horror, doesn't it?
It really does, and it's committed, I think, to, I think I said last month that, and I was trying to sum up why I was a bit ambivalent about the Graham Williams era, but sort of said there was a lot of interesting ideas bubbling around in the mix. I mean, this has
bubble wrap in the mix.
Yeah, this has bubble wrap in the mix primarily. This works with some, I think, fairly stock sci-fi ideas, but it's all in the utterly committed execution. There's not much, I think, in terms of sort of philosophical or ideological meat on the bones, much as this is a clever script in the Hinchcliffe era, but it's just about saying, what does Doctor Who do? It scares kids, so we are going to just.
I mean, that's Robert Holmes' famous quote when he took over: "Is it's a chance to scare the buggers?" Or something.
Totally, and it does it mercilessly, and without passing up on an opportunity to really land any of that.
Ian Marter, I think this is the first story we've reviewed with him.
I don't think we encountered Harry previously.
You probably know the reason he was there was they didn't know who they were going to cast as the Doctor, and if it was an older guy, they need someone to do the muscle.
Yes.
So he's only really here for one season, and he always seems a little bit of an anomaly before you get down to the Tom Baker and the girl.
Yes.
And the robot dog. How did you find him here?
I think he's an interesting character because I think they are... obviously, there is this more developed relationship between the Doctor and Sarah, obviously already, and she has more experience of the kind of time travel and adventure than he does, which she makes clear at the top of it. It does bring out a different side to Tom Baker's character because he's less. He has a very close and quite protective relationship with Sarah, and he respects her and admires her and all that kind of thing. But one of the things I like about Tom Baker's performance is when he can just be sort of really cold and methodical. Giving him a regular character who he's sort of on the same side as to do that, I think works very effectively. I like the fact also that, I mean, Harry's got an odd charm, but he's also, I think, being quite consciously written as a dick, and he's a posh twit who thinks he knows more than he does, and he's kind of...
Sarah puts him in his place, really, doesn't she?
She does.
That dynamic between the two of them is the most interesting, I think, than either one of them with the Doctor.
Yes, there's that bit where he has a little laugh at the High Minister's message about fairer sex at the top of the totem pole. I bet that got you excited, kind of thing.
And she more or less says, "Fuck off."
Yeah, pretty much. But he's being written as this guy who, and I think there are layers to how he's written as a character. He has this sort of what you might more latterly term this kind of Bullingdon Club easy confidence, that the upper classes have, this general assumption of ease in any situation, which will be enough to get you through it, and is frequently pulled up short by the fact that his breeding is not enough to pull him through these complicated situations, and he needs to be more resourceful. But whilst he's obviously written as a flawed character and a character who has a quite unpleasant streak to him, there's something about both the writing and the performance which means that he also has a charm. It's not like it's not like a kind of Turlough style situation where you just think, oh well, this guy's a dick. I mean, he is a dick, but he's a good character and one that you sort of like having around.
It's interesting that then later you get characters like Rory and Danny Pink, who might not seem immediately similar, but I think occupy quite a bit of the same
They totally occupy
space.
the same role as the secondary companion, and Mickey as well.
Yeah, and they're kind of there to bolster the female companion almost,
yes,
to show how much better she is than the...
And I think, this is also quite interesting because this has got a couple of women's lib digs in it from Harry, and also in a sense from the Doctor, where the Doctor motivates Sarah to go the extra mile at the end by essentially being a massively sexist douche to her, saying that it's not just her that she's useless, but he impugns, he says, you girls always do this, like girls like you think you're tough but you can't be relied on. And I think this is a conversation best parked, I think, until we discuss The Time Warrior, but I do, which was also written by Robert Holmes. Whereas I think this idea that the creation of Sarah is that it would be very modern and of the day to have a feminist character, but the virtues of feminism are very much up for grabs as a debating.
It acknowledges women's lib, but then uses it as a...
Well, yeah, and bluntly, as I say, we will come back to this later, but The Time Warrior almost puts Sarah in the same role as Harry's here, that Sarah's got very firm views about, women's potential and feminism, and the idea is to show that those ideas come up short, those ideas don't survive contact with reality, which certainly to my mind leaves a slightly nasty taste in the mouth. And I'm not quite sure whether, as obviously we discussed last month, Robert Holmes does not always necessarily pursue a particularly progressive line of politics in his Doctor Who. I do think it's interesting, although Sarah is in and of herself presented as a great character and a strong character, and that obviously very much comes across with the performance, still there's that idea that her feminism is something that she can be taunted for.
Yeah, I think it's certainly the case that the Doctor taunts her as an encouragement, as Jim said,
yes,
sort of cattle prod. Even though he's doing it for the right reasons and you sort of correct for that in your mind, that's not a way to encourage someone that you'd use now.
Or if you translated it to if he had a gay companion or someone of colour with him.
Yeah, you can imagine. I'm not going to do
it.
But yeah,
absolutely. But yes, exactly. What was
you can imagine the kind of taunting that? Oh, that's the same with all you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say you're Mrs. Rory now or something to try and motivate a character.
Well,
wow.
We discussed that.
Wow.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, no, fair dues.
Amy Williams.
But at least it goes to show that you can be
very
as clumsy, clumsy now as perhaps then. But at least at least the Doctor's motivation in that moment is good. What really grabs me is that the perfection of the first episode. You talked already about the creepy opening, and that dynamic between Harry's sort of very studiously staying with the Doctor and examining things, and he's clearly a bit frightened to roam out by himself. There's Jane, on the other hand, bowls into another room and starts sort of fiddling around with...
She's an old hand at this.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's that meta comment about, I'm always telling her not to wander off, which nothing would happen if she didn't.
No.
And the whole thing of the oxygen then not being there, and there's the mystery of it, but also then Robert Holmes creates these little moments of peril that create dramatic tension over the opening minutes. I just think it's just really well constructed television.
So this is frequently cited, I think, certainly by Doctor Who fans, but I think by people who are more broadly interested in sort of the historic sweep of television and cinema as an influence on Alien.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Ridley Scott has ever come out and said, yes, I've seen it, but considering how he was tapped to direct Doctor Who in the 60s anyway...
Yeah, or a designer to begin with. I
Yes,
think
he was
meant
a
to
BBC
be
designer.
He could have designed the Daleks or whatever he would have come up with for it. No, I was actually just listening to an interview with Walter Hill recently, who's a producer on Alien and rewrote the script from Dan O'Bannon's original, Ronald Suchet. And yeah, I mean, Dan O'Bannon's original script was very much based on things like It, the Terror from Beyond Space. I think it was Walter Hill's rewrite. I'm doubting he had any interest in Doctor Who. But also going further back, I think these ideas are things in things like Voyage of the Space Beagle. Some of those ideas of the sort of insect-like aliens infesting people and laying eggs inside them. I think it's maybe broadly a coincidence, really. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy enough with that. I think there's a fair chance Ridley Scott will have seen this as a TV professional at the time and might have taken something from it. But
yes,
I wouldn't over.
It was good.
Yeah, I wouldn't overanalyze it.
Fair enough. But yes, I suppose it is interesting as well that it does build on a lot of those kind of, not stock sci-fi tropes, but of the sort of 50s, the idea of the sleeper colony and then the fear of insects is pretty primal and goes right back, all sorts of 50s B movies that involve shooting normal
if anything,
insects
I'm thinking,
really large.
Yeah, if anything, I'm thinking more of Cronenberg stuff than Alien, really.
That's interesting, yeah.
Just as a aesthetic or whatever, the idea of the body turning in on itself and Noah's transformation later, which is kind of the main thrust of this plot. I think as a kid, I imagined this was just going to be an army of Wirren invading, whereas it's not really, is it? It's more about Noah's transformation.
Yes.
Again, it's kind of like a Troughton base under siege in some parts, isn't it? It's them trying to work their way through the arc now. It's not working so well. Yeah,
but weirdly manages to be about so much more, I think, by just, rather than having this sort of... Because the characters are not... The defrosted humans in this are not stock characters as such. I mean, as John says, there's certainly a, which I think is intentional in the script, a kind of eugenics kind of streak to them, and they are all conspicuously sort of white and upper middle class.
Yeah, well, there's Wendy Williams as Vera, and Noah seems, especially Vera, seems quite distant, doesn't she? And antiseptic. Yeah. Whereas when you get down to is it Rogan? He's a rather more blue collar kind of figure, isn't he? He's got quite a lot of pizzazz to him.
Kind of,
When he says it's like he'd have been happy to just die on Earth during the solar flares because he likes heat and kind of thing.
Yeah, and what I liked as well with him was when he knocks out the Doctor to make sure that he makes the sacrifice and not the Doctor at the end. He says, "I don't want you to get in trouble with the engineers union or something."
Oh yeah.
By taking over his job. He's quite playful. I mean, Rogan, it's a tiny little role, really. There's not much to it. Richardson Morgan does a fantastic job.
Name.
Yeah, great name.
Two surnames.
Rogan, I think is a terrific character. As you say, there is a bit more blue collar to him, and he's definitely the most sympathetic of the humans, actually. Which is why I think his death then is quite affecting when it happens. Coming back to the more senior people within the society, as you pointed out, they're all white and sort of upper middle class and what have you. Now Noah, we talked earlier about the fact that he retains his humanity even as he has his metamorphosis into Wirren. But actually, it's not even that he retains his humanity; he develops and his humanity is enhanced. When we first meet him, he's almost villainous.
Yeah,
because he immediately says that.
Because we meet him second after Vera.
Yes. And then
Vira.
And he immediately says that Harry and Sarah Jane are regressive and probably should be killed. And so he goes from a point of being a cold eugenicist, sort of authoritarian figure, to recognizing the humanity of those who've tried to help his crew, his cryogenically frozen crew, and ends up making an ultimate sacrifice to preserve them in a way that he feels more human by the end, even though he's physically changed.
Yeah, I actually found that whole payoff as well. That with all the Wirren being blown up on their craft, Noah among them, and Rogan's sacrifice. Found it fairly moving, to be honest. And it's quite rare that I find that classic Doctor Who kind of does have that kind of emotional pull on it. Yeah,
because sometimes when that thing happens of the supporting characters step up to do the sacrifice that the Doctor had already agreed to do, which takes us back to the Sontaran stratagem last month, I guess.
Yes.
Sometimes it just feels like a mechanic part of the script because obviously the Doctor can't do this, else there'd be no more show. But here it does kind of feel like the Doctor's presence has kick-started humanity out of a slightly antiseptic phase, doesn't it?
Yeah, it
yeah,
really
exactly.
does.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally agree, Jim. You get the sense that, again, dramatically, even though obviously in real life it would take more than one person's sort of 40-hour intervention in something to sort of change a whole society, dramatically it feels like that's what he's there to do.
What do we think of the Wirren as a concept?
They're really horrible, aren't
Yeah.
they?
Mm.
Just
Creepy and nasty, and
growing their larvae inside people.
Yeah, which we don't see, but it's just a horrible idea.
Yeah, but the idea of it.
Yeah, you're actually rubbing your feet together a little bit.
Yeah, that's grim.
I'm going to ask the inevitable. Do you think they should come back in the series? Because I think they could look great now. 'Cause one of the problems here is they've got these insect arms, but they're clearly shuffling along on what would be their arses.
yes,
Because it's the operator's feet is coming out of the abdomen
yes,
at the
the
bottom.
man has to stand up in the suit somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest,
I think if they did bring them back now, the temptation would be to be a bit more graphic with the egg laying and whatnot.
Yes, I mean, I think you would either have to play on the horror of it, or because I mean, obviously they're not going to carry much name recognition with the general public. Very few people are going to get actively excited about it.
Wirren versus Zarbi. You don't think that would be the cover of the Radio Times?
Oh, well, I mean, I'd watch that, of course. But no, I mean, I think you'd either really need to go to town on the body horror, or also take a slice of what works about this, which is that it's tight, it's claustrophobic, and it's absolutely terrifying.
Of all my Doctor Who stories, this is the most difficult one for me to talk about.
Sladen talking.
It was the most exciting one for me because it was the first one which the public saw.
And that's Philip Hinchcliffe, our producer. And I can't remember a single thing about it, really. I'm Tom Baker. I'm really looking forward to this.
So we move now to 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Now, last month we reviewed the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky, and this is the Doctor's daughter, which is the sort of third wheel in that trio of stories.
The Return of Martha arc.
The third wheel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to sort of give you a sense of what happens, the TARDIS by itself seemingly whisks the 10th Doctor, Donna and Martha to Messaline, where humans and the fish-like Hath waging a perpetual war for control of a mythical artifact called the Source, which turns out to be a terraforming device. They use some sort of weird DNA gizmo to clone new soldiers, and the Doctor, they're terribly pleased they found a fresh source in the Doctor, and they shove his hand into this machine, and up pops Georgia Moffat.
She was sitting there, was she?
Who is a genetic rehash of the Doctor, basically.
Would have been a better title for the story.
Martha,
Rehash Tennant.
Martha, via an explosion, gets stuck behind enemy lines with the Hath, and the Doctor struggles with his new fatherhood, and Donna attempts to solve the mystery behind the base's origins. I mentioned last month that season 4 is probably my favourite of the seasons of New Who, and I said how last month I was slightly anxious about watching the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky because I hadn't liked it, or I had a dim memory that I hadn't liked it, and I was sort of not really looking forward to watching this. Now, the same thing is true here. I wasn't looking forward to watching this because, I remember at the time not liking it, and I still don't like it.
No, okay.
I don't think there's not a possible sort of revisionist second reading of this.
Okay.
There's a couple of good scenes in it. Obviously, and I suspect we'll talk about this again, the scene with the Doctor and Donna talking about family, and where he says, I've been a father before, and that's quite affecting. But it's largely affecting because Catherine Tate and Tennant are such good actors.
Yes.
It's not really there in the material. The material is extraordinarily slight, and as we sort of mentioned last month, though I think unfairly perhaps, because I think there's a lot going on in this Sontaran Stratagem, to bring Martha back for this seems very odd. Like, just why is she there?
It almost feels slightly like they had her under contract for another couple of weeks, so they thought, I'll stick her in the next one as well.
Yeah.
Right. And actually her scene with because she befriends a particular member of the Hath, and they're very cute, the Hath, aren't they?
I like the Hath.
Yeah, they're very
fun.
cute with their little gills and their little sort of breathing chamber thing in front of them. And when the Hath sacrifices itself for Martha, and she is very upset about that, that's again quite a nice scene.
For me, that's the standout element of this episode, is actually Martha's scenes getting to know the Hath.
Yeah, where they start sort of touching her a bit like that wonderful comic relief video of Billy Connolly with his hair. He's in the village with the kids and he puts his head down and they're all grabbing his hair. It's similar to that. They're sort of like, who is this? But what is this? They've never, almost like they hadn't dealt with a human being before. But generally speaking, this isn't doing anything. Georgia Moffat it's not really a very well written role. It's not, she's not, I don't know whether she's not well cast or it's just a weird dynamic, and
they seem to just try to cook up a bit of a Buffy kind of thing.
Yes.
But
and she's obviously
about 10 years
slightly
too
sort
late.
of generic blonde ass-kicking action girl.
Yeah, and also she's sort of oddly too sexy to sort of immediately... The point of it is that the Doctor suddenly finds himself with a daughter, and there's meant to be a sort of dynamic there. And without going into the fact that obviously Tennant ended up marrying her, just she's too sexy to... Or too kick-ass or too sassy or whatever for that relationship to be obviously developed in 40 minutes. I don't know.
You think she'd be more like Ali Sheedy in The Breakfast Club or something?
Yeah.
Matt?
I think I sort of essentially agree with everything John said, but I possibly come at this from a slightly different angle. I remember this being very undercooked at the time, and I think it is very undercooked. But I think part of the problem is the expectations that it sets up. Not just in having a story called The Doctor's Daughter, which is inevitably the way, before it actually became an episode, the way JNT would always tease that they were going to do an episode called The Doctor's Wife or something, because that would then be, in this episode we're going to meet the Doctor's wife, and on the one hand, the title is a tease, but it's kind of odd in that it's a slight episode that attempts to deal with some big emotional stuff, but also kind of throws it away and kind of ducks its own, mixing my metaphors here, it sort of dodges its own proposition, really. The idea is, yes, exactly what if the Doctor was sort of suddenly lumbered with this kind of parenthood, but the actual... Because the other thing that sort of struck me about this is that there's a few other sci-fi ideas going on here, and actually there's more of an interesting sort of situational sci-fi story that the script is more interested in telling. So it kind of sets up this central proposition of what if the Doctor suddenly gained the responsibilities of parenthood, but then seems very uninterested in actually telling that story. Now, I think setting aside the only thing that the daughter element really brings to it is a couple of emotional beats, some of which work, like the family scene that John mentioned, and some of which kind of fizzle out fairly inconsequentially. Like, I don't for 1 minute buy the Doctor-Jenny relationship that forges. I mean, she seems like a nice person, and in a sort of that kind of person that they occasionally build in as possible companion of the week, who, as soon as they say, "Oh, I'd like to travel with you," is going to be dead before the end of the episode. The story, I think, is actually more interested in the kind of paradox about this war that's meant to have gone on for generations, and in fact only went on for a week because they were getting through 20 generations in a day. And I think that's not a particularly original idea. I think it's quite, and the script certainly, I think anyone watching this is probably a few beats ahead of the characters in terms of working that out. I think it's quite a nice idea, and I think it's quite interestingly explored. The final showdown in the terraforming suite, I think, is pretty good, and I think...
Come on, are you for real?
What, they build your society on a man who wouldn't shoot
no, I mean, it's not well executed.
Christ.
I think there's an interesting, if fairly... Route 1 sci-fi story lurking in there somewhere. But to be honest, I mean, my overall opinion, I don't hate this, but I don't think it moves the dial at all.
Can't believe you see anything good in that scene. I mean, just he's speechifying through it. I mean, it's like
he's in
very
full
lazy...
Daleks in Manhattan mode at that point,
God,
isn't he?
No,
yeah.
the Doctor's it's a thing that people do. Writers lazy with the 10th Doctor just give him a speech. Right, and there's a couple of examples. There's the bit where they're talking about eradicating the Hath, and he said, "You look up genocide in the dictionary, and the definition is a picture of me saying over my dead body."
It's a picture of Sylvester McCoy.
What? Yeah, and then he does this whole big speech about make the foundation of your society a man who never. It's like, oh, whatever. I mean, come on. It's just so poor.
That's what his daughter should have been saying in the background. Come on, Dad.
Oh, Dad.
Well,
Whatever.
I mean, Tennant
always
does his
does
best with the material, as does Catherine Tate, as does Freema Agyeman. But at the end of the day, they all act it well enough, but it doesn't earn the emotional payoff it's clearly meant to have.
Absolutely not. I completely agree.
And, it's dealing with war and sacrifice and familial ties. And you can't just create a full... I mean, I know it's all sci-fi bullshit, but... Georgia Moffat's character, like she's created as a 22, 23-year-old with a personality within the 10 seconds of the opening of the bloody episode.
It's entirely unearned.
It's just like you can't buy that person exists.
It's pre-credits.
Yeah. You can't buy that person really exists. Sorry, Jim, we haven't let you say anything yet.
I've got very little to add, really. You carry on with your train of thought there.
But, seriously, you can't buy into the fact that... And then to develop the relationship over 40 minutes, oh, she's a soldier, she'll always be a soldier. Oh, no, she's not actually, she's quite spunky. Oh, she's a bit like me. Oh. You can't buy into it. You can't... Maybe if she was there... Maybe if she had been there... Maybe if the Doctor's daughter had been the first of the 3 episodes and she was the introduced character for 3 episodes, that relationship could develop interestingly. But not only is she not there long enough for this to really tug at your heartstrings the way it's clearly meant to, the way she's cast as a generic, sassy, blonde, Buffy-esque kind of character just doesn't lend itself to her having that kind of relationship or pulling on those emotional heartstrings. So it's just not it can't work.
No, I agree. I completely agree, and it seems very odd that given that Russell T Davies knows when dealing with the Doctor's kind of emotional life that he what his kind of live ammo is. It seems very weird that those ideas would be seeded into a sort of one-off, doesn't really go anywhere, chuck it into the middle of the season kind of episode, than it would be, say, and I mean, God forbid I'm saying this as an example of it done well, because I certainly think it wasn't done well, but something like the kind of River Song character where you feel this is at least an ongoing person of importance that they are trying to build a relationship with or tease out what a relationship might be over like a number of episodes. It seems very odd that you would do the Doctor's daughter as a 40-minute, and we'll never talk about this again.
Well, unless you start listening to the new Big Finish range, which will be coming later in the year.
Of course.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you knew this.
Are they doing a Jenny range?
Yes.
Oh, I assumed you were joking.
No.
I
wouldn't joke.
Make the same Big
I
Finish
wouldn't joke
about
a thing like that. No, it's coming your way.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. Initially, she was going to stay dead, but Moffat, as incoming showrunner, wanted her brought back. So I think we were living in fear of maybe seeing a few more Jenny things. But who knows? Maybe he'll...
Hang on, so Moffat had a say in this?
Yeah, because he was going to be coming up as showrunner.
Yeah.
And I think originally she was going to die and stay dead, but then we got this little coda at the end where which is my favourite bit, because you got the human, I can't remember his name, and the Hath together.
Yeah.
The guy with the really bad acne.
The Hath has to look kind of surprised at what's going on.
Which is difficult to do with
Which is great, because he's just wobbling his head from side to side and jerking his shoulders around. It's wonderful. I had to watch that bit a few times, actually. Yeah, it's wonderful.
The Hath are great.
Yeah, no, I've very little to add to what you guys have said. It feels like this was earmarked from the beginning as the filler episode.
Yeah.
I remember they announced the title in Radio Times when they did this season's, this full rundown, and the Doctor's daughter was a bit, ooh. And yeah, as we've said, by the time you've even got the titles, before the titles appeared on screen, any hint of this being some barnstormer about Gallifrey or something is gone.
Or something that might move you at all at the end of it.
And it ends up being, I've got to say, I think Doctor Who's at its dullest when you can imagine the story very much being a Star Trek episode with very few revisions to the script. I've nothing against Star Trek, but it's a very different beast to Doctor Who, where the format is doing all sorts of weird jumble sale things. Whereas this, I'm currently watching Voyager for the first time, kind of enjoying it, but this feels like it could have been, John looks aghast at it. This feels like it could have been a Star Trek from the 90s or even the 60s with very little.
You can totally imagine Riker being put in the David Tennant role in this. And
well, if it was Riker's daughter, there'd probably be several candidates.
Hey!
Yeah. But yeah, it just feels very generic.
I don't need no DNA machine. I got a DNA machine in my pants.
Wow, where's your Riker coming from?
Yeehaw! It's American, isn't it?
Gosh. This hasn't got a great reputation, and one of the things, as well as the Make Your Foundations as Society, a man who wouldn't, General Cobb gets quite a bad press. This is it John Terry? the actor? Not to be confused with the
okay.
footballer, who's a stalwart of Derek Jarman films and Excalibur, John Boorman's Excalibur. What do you think of his... You're looking around a bit nervously.
No, it's Nigel Terry.
Nigel Terry, sorry.
Yeah.
It's John Terry's Hawk the Slayer. I'm getting a bit confused.
Yeah, so Nigel Terry playing Cobb. What about him?
So after a guy with 2 surnames in the last story, got a guy with 2 first names. How did you find him? Because he's meant to be like the head villain, the thing that's really keeping the plot.
Oh, he's really nasty, isn't he? Like, he's military. Yeah. I mean, what is he? He's just.
I mean, I think
he's a Route One fanatic, but he doesn't really get much. He doesn't really get much dialogue to develop his character, does he?
Well, the other problem is that modern Doctor Who is a character. There's another example that temporarily escapes me, but whenever they try and do sort of grizzled in this era, I always find it somewhat toe-curling. I think maybe...
Well, we've got Michael Brandon coming up at the end of this season.
Yeah, yes. So it's like, he looks like a fairly safe idea of what a grizzled kind of character
Fanatical,
like that would be, whereas you sort of imagine they're wanting to go for something a bit more Apocalypse Now, but they have limited casting budget and it has to be ready to go out for tea time.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, you don't, supposedly this is a guy who's meant to have been sent somewhat insane by the situation, but no, I mean, you don't buy it.
Our main problem with this seems to be an underdeveloped script then, or is it the entire premise is...
Yeah, so who's Stephen Greenhorn? Let's learn more about Stephen Greenhorn.
He'd previously done, I think, the Lazarus Experiment, previous season. The
3.
one with Mark Gatiss when he turns into a kind of throwback.
He's an old man who becomes a young man. And then...
Is there a third Greenhorn script?
The third Greenhorn?
Yeah.
I don't think there is, but let's double check.
He's not a popular writer, though.
Yeah, so you're right, Jim. He's only written those 2, Lazarus Experiment and Doctor's Daughter.
But Chibnall's writing room is taking submissions at the moment. And who knows, he could be coming back for the big finish, Jenny Range.
I mean, the other thing that I thought was, this is such a retcon, anal sort of continuity thing to do. But the problem as well is that once you've seen Let's Kill Hitler,
yes,
there's the bit where River Song revives the Doctor by giving him some regeneration energy. And when Jenny's dying in his arms and he's really upset about it, you think, why doesn't he slip her one?
Careful.
I mean, some regeneration.
I think David
energy.
Tennant was thinking that.
I mean, given that later on Peter Capaldi's prepared to use regeneration energy to revive Davros, you'd have thought if that was something that the Doctor had in his wheelhouse, he might bring it out for his daughter, who he's slightly upset about. But maybe that's.
I mean, obviously that is. It's ridiculous, but it's just. Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think it does sort of point to the fact that this just seems entirely misconceived from the off. I mean, as I said,
it seems like the title was the only reason to have it.
I'm warmer than you guys on the idea of an episode about the war that only goes on for a week in cloning, and I think there might be something interesting there if you rattle the parts around. But it certainly. Well, it's not even that it sets itself up with a big task and then immediately ducks it. Immediately says, "You're not going to commit to this. We're not going to commit to this. We know that this is just holding time until next week's episode. You can skip this one and you won't
come back for the Unicorn and the Wasp."
Yes, exactly. You can skip this one and you won't be missing anything that you need to understand the ongoing story of Doctor Who. And I just think it's a very strange decision. I don't know why this happened.
I know we sort of touched on this, but just as a little, it does seem a very strange decision to film that coda where she comes back to life, and then there's still all the sort of, so where does RTD take the Doctor in the rest of the series and the specials? The sort of lonely god guy who's driven mad by his loneliness and by his power, basically.
Also, sorry, just to in a finale that is all about assembling everyone who's ever meant anything to the Doctor, she doesn't even come back at the end of the series in terms of how little impression she seems designed to make.
Well, this is it.
And in his big regeneration meet up with his old pals, they even have a Hath hanging around in the background with Captain Jack.
Yeah, that's right. So Midshipman Alonso, or whatever he's called, he's getting chatted up by Captain Jack. There's a Hath there, isn't there?
Oh, yeah.
But there's no Jenny. And it's just very strange. I mean, obviously, you can say, well, he doesn't realise that she is alive. But, yeah, you would have thought Journey's End would... Yeah, if you're bringing back anyone who...
Journey's End goes to such effort to unveil everyone who's meant something to the 10th Doctor.
Obviously, I'm glad She didn't come back for
I mean,
that.
no, I'm
And
not saying it would have been better if she'd done.
If they had, it wouldn't have meant anything to most of the audience, and it would have deflated the Rose thing as the big build-up, the big reveal.
Why did they do this?
Yeah, that's my point, right? That's basically my point.
You're saying leave her dead, basically.
Well, no, why did they do the whole thing? Why did that? Why did they try and do an episode about the trials of fatherhood if then they are going to completely duck doing that within the episode, let alone within the broader context of Doctor Who?
Yeah, it's a very
going
poor
back
decision.
to John's idea, because I think that is a good one. If they'd reversed the order here, had the Doctor's daughter and then carried her into the Santoran thing and she'd been killed at the end of that.
Yeah.
Or do you think that would have been too bleak? Because by then people would have actually got attached to her, perhaps.
I think that possibly would have been too bleak, but she could have gone off to do her own adventures or whatever,
Yeah.
or joined UNIT or whatever, whatever. But the thing is, right, so there's two things. The Lonely God stuff is kind of referenced here, because there's the Doctor's arrogance when she's sort of created, and he says, "You're an echo, a Time Lord is so much more." There's that arrogance there, and that sort of that weirdness that Tennant's Doctor does sometimes have. But when he's doing the specials and he's very very purposefully alone, and then there's the whole thing with Matt Smith's Doctor being the last of his kind, and there's no one else who's alive. There's a Time Lord out there, and I know this is really anal and whatever, but it is sort of odd that you would create this new Time Lord character. They are out there somewhere, and just not. Even if you thought the casting was a mistake, that's not a problem, right? You can.
In fairness, she regenerates back into herself, though, doesn't she?
You could argue that it's her first iteration. Therefore, how when Tennant's freshly regenerated, he can re-go his hand, can't he?
Yeah.
So you can say, well, because she's just been, I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the point is, if she's clearly got regeneration capability, right? I mean, I can't believe I'm even talking about this, but
we need to fill out this.
Yeah, we need to get to the end of this half hour. The point is, though,
this is episode 4.
There's all this stuff about how he's the last of the Time Lords. They created this Time Lord. Like Matt says, it's just very odd that they even created this character because it fucks around with.
But they set that up. I mean, it's like. And I know I keep saying this, but they hold the idea at arm's length within even the context of the episode.
Exactly.
They almost go to great lengths to try and give themselves a get out for why she's not his daughter and why this isn't a character that's important enough ever to be referenced again within the episode. And it seems very weird to try and do that if you're then just not going to commit to it at all.
Because at Clonus, the only thing they don't use is the scream. Peter Graves, Dick Sargent, Timothy Donnelly, Paulette Breen, Keenan Wynn. Parts, the Clonus Horror. The motion picture that will steal your heart and your liver and your kidneys and your...
So for our final story tonight, we are heading back to 1967 for The Faceless Ones, which sees the second Doctor, Jamie, Ben and Polly materialise on a Gatwick airport runway. And they are very shortly separated and immediately stumble on a plot by a race of undercover invaders called the Chameleons to steal the identities of some kidnapped tourists in order to replace their own scarred bodies. Jamie picks up a new friend, Samantha Briggs, and she helps, along with some of the airport authorities, to figure out what's going on with these shape-shifting, identity-stealing aliens. Notable for a few things it's the final story to feature Ben and Polly, and is set on exactly the same day as The War Machines, which saw Ben and Polly introduced a year earlier. So they see fit to make their exit at the end of it. Only 2 episodes of this still exist in the archives. It's a 6-part story, but we can only watch episodes 1 and 3. I did the audio release of the rest of it. Jim, what do you think of The Faceless Ones?
I often quite like the first season of a new Doctor when they haven't quite figured out what they're going to do with him. And we've probably said this before, Troughton's known as the Base Under Siege Doctor, the Monster Doctor by season 5. This is season 4. I quite like the freshness of season 4. It's ideas that you wouldn't really get in Doctor Who at any other point. I suppose this could have been a Hartnell story, perhaps, in as much as it's weird. It's a setting that don't go back to. As an airport setting, it's far more successful than Time Flight. I called it Twin Dilemma.
More successful than a Twin Dilemma.
Notable,
that much as well.
Notable things to say about it, though, are that it's Malcolm Hulke's first contribution to the series, along with David Ellis, who didn't come back. I'm not sure it's super typical of the stuff we think of Malcolm Hulke for. He's more of a social awareness, kind of political driven.
Yeah, there isn't really any of that here.
This feels fairly generic spy-fi kind of stuff from the 60s.
Twilight Zone, Body Snatcher of the Week kind of thing.
I think at least from Invasion of the Body Snatchers in the 50s, the film version, but right through a lot of ITC spy-fi stuff, this idea of identity theft, maybe not as extreme as this, but I'm going to say it's 6 episodes long. Obviously, they didn't really want it to be, but there was an overspend on Underwater Menace earlier in the season. So we're left with a story which I'm going to say spread a little thin. It's unfortunate that a lot of the episodes don't exist, because what is there does look quite good, I think. But ultimately, it's too long and a little bit annoying. Just as a kid, I was seeing so many of these things where it's like, we found a dead body, then we'll go and get the authorities and the body's gone. Oh, but you saw it as well, didn't you? I've never seen you before in my life. And that just, as a kid, it drove me mad, because I'd seen so many of them and you knew all the beats it was going to have to go to before. That
sort of bureaucracy as a break on.
So, yeah. So, in fairness...
I'm not standing for this.
It does get quite bonkers towards the end, which is nice. But I'm going to let you guys bring your own thing to the table now with it. So, John.
I found this quite frustrating, but I found it frustrating not because it was bad, but because it was good but too long. It's got a lot of things in its favour. So David Ellis and Malcolm Hulke have written this, and obviously, as we were saying, Hulke, that you tend to be. I was very excited when I saw that he'd written it, because I thought there was going to be some sort of social dimension to it, apart from a sort of disdain for pettifogging bureaucracy in the character of the Commandant. Sort of witless, buffoon, bluffy, sort of... apart from that, there's not really... And even that, I'd struggle to call that a sort of social subtext. It's just a character, really. But there's not much of that. What there is some great atmospheric 60s sci-fi with some really, really disturbing things, like 50,000 kids being abducted. You know, Samantha, in one of the sort of plot strands which does you feel gain by being stretched out and lengthened, the fact that she's looking for her brother, that's quite affecting. It makes it real that these people have gone missing. The whole sort of, it's very disturbing the way they've plotted. So, you know, they know that adolescents going out for a shagging holiday are not going to find the time to write their postcards for their parents, so they pretend they've made it all very easy for them by pre-doing the postcards, but then collecting them up so they can abduct the kids, sending the postcards back. So it sounds like all of it is sort of creepily well thought out.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of quite disturbing, the way that's done. So a couple of the performances are really good, and I'm thinking particularly of Donald Pickering as Blade, Captain Blade, right? You know, very, very chilling. It's a pity that we've only got episodes 1 and 3, because when you start hearing, is it Fraser Hines doing the commentary?
It can't always be Peter Purvis.
The plane's wings fold back to create a sleek aircraft, which then docks with a space. Oh, for God's sake! Come on, we ain't got that. That's the best bit. You know, it's quite annoying, because I would really love to see how they
can do a nice CGI.
I'd really love to see how that's rendered, or just that narration over some porn. That'd be quite interesting. No, that's an aside. But I think it's really interesting in that regard, but there's a couple of bits that really don't make this quite stick together. The first, as Jim mentioned, it's simply too long. Episode 1 is a chore, and it's 25 minutes long, and it feels like it's an hour. When they encounter the brainwashed double version of Polly, and there's sort of like what feels like a 5-minute scene of her saying, "No, I had an English governess," and it just goes on forever. And then the final thing is that when they're in the space station, and the Doctor says, "Well, we've got your," you know, conveniently they need to keep the humans alive, otherwise they get killed, but they didn't take them with them. Which would have been, they left them in the car park. You know, it's just, I know I'm one to obsess over plot minutiae, but this very carefully thought out thing, relying on the long stay car park at Gatwick Airport, not in any way
have you got
being
the postcards? Yes.
Yeah, it's just, that's not very good. And I'm not quite sure what the deal is that the Doctor reaches. Like, we won't turn off the armbands of the people, but there's only 25 of them, and there's 50,000 others, and you'd think that they might.
A bad deal's better than no deal. I think that's what he.
But what I'm saying is, like, the 50,000 people who've got nice new bodies in the space station, you'd think would overturn the will of the 25 who have got their doubles in the car park. I'm just saying that none of it.
That's Jenny's first adventure in the Big Finish.
Okay, basically, cut a long story short. Sorry, forgive me. What I mean is that the resolution doesn't make a whole heap of sense, and the very well laid plan by the aliens
for turns a padded out story, it comes to a heck of a rush end.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. And so there are some really cool, chilling ideas, and the interplay between Samantha and Jamie is quite fun. Their little romance that doesn't quite end up as a romance. But then again, like poor Ben. I mean, he basically runs off scared at the beginning. Doesn't really make much of an appearance throughout the whole thing, does he? And Polly, apart from being a governess, being a Swiss finishing school person or whatever, it reminded me a bit of some of the Sayward stuff, actually, where you got a big TARDIS team, and then the scriptwriter's gone, oh fuck it, just park these two for a bit. You know, it was, it doesn't quite hold, I think.
Matt.
I can't disagree with a lot of the flaws that you guys have raised. I think those are things that are definitely there. But I fucking loved this.
Wow.
I thought it was brilliant. And I think it's hands down the best Troughton we've encountered so far.
Oh, no, I agree with that.
Well, I was going to say we've done the Macra Terror as well, which was earlier this season, which has a similar takeover.
Like the Macra Terror. But I don't know, there's something... I feel like some of the problems that you guys flagged, particularly it being 6 parts and the pacing is a little awry, you know, yes, I agree. I slightly feel that's kind of baked in for a 6-parter. I'm now getting to the point where I just make allowances for that. And I think, yes, there are aspects of the plot that are somewhat convoluted. But
even convoluted, the end just doesn't make sense.
Yes, no, the end doesn't really make sense, and it possibly rendered a little more confusing only having the audio without the visual cues, particularly because you're dealing with doubles and shapeshifters and things like that. It's like occasionally a little hard to follow. But I think it manages to, I think impressively, it manages to sustain a tone of taut, unpleasant dread, which I certainly don't associate with the Troughton era. I thought it was terrific. I completely disagree with John about episode 1 being a chore. I thought episode 1 was all killer, no filler, and I think the pacing only really started to kind of sag as the story went on. I'm absolutely gutted that we don't have the run of this. I would have happily traded Web of Fear for the rest of the episodes of this.
Philip Morris is turned off in disgust.
Exactly. Yes. No. Sorry, Philip Morris. No. I thought
you liked episode 1.
I loved it. I loved it. I was completely gripped by it.
Oh, God. No, because I think
it's got some good location filming in it. It keeps...
they run around some tarmac and hide behind wheels for 25 minutes. It's really dull. I think it picks up in pace. And although
when the episodes are lost.
And I think it's a shame that we don't have the rest of it. There are definitely things I like a lot about it. I'm frustrated about it because I just think... Maybe as a 4-parter, I think it probably would have sung. If they just tightened up the resolution, I think it would have been really, really good. But no, that first episode I found interminable.
Wow. I mean, no, I was in. I was like totally in on it. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And remember, airports would have been pretty exotic places back in.
Well, I think
67.
It's also another thing that I think it's...
Apparently Gatwick's got 5 runways, according to the script. Runways 3 and 5. It's like, wow, okay. News to Gatwick.
Even though this was being set a year earlier than it was actually being broadcast. It broadcast 67, 66. Interesting. I mean,
Wotan's first job was
yes.
Yes.
I mean, I think there are a couple of things that that really struck me watching this. I agree that yes, I perhaps hoped for a little more in the way of social resonance from a Malcolm Hulke script. But what I would also say is that this is a story set on contemporary Earth, dealing with some, certainly riffing on some reasonably contemporary things about contemporary Earth. I mean, the package holiday industry really gearing up, obviously the holiday boom of the 50s, gearing through to, the youth holiday boom of, the late 60s is very much riding on the emergence of, Club 1830, things like that. I think the fact that at this point, 60s Doctor Who didn't dip much into a contemporary setting. It was very rare, obviously the War Machine's a year earlier, but it was very rare for 60s Doctor Who to feel like it was set in the then and now. And for me, that kind of gets it over the line in terms of that disappointment about maybe we want a little more from a Malcolm Hulke script, because I think already in setting it very much in the real world with some real concerns or some real trends, that does enough. I think, the Pertwee era is all, or pretty much all, meant to be set in the present day, and he can sort of pick and choose his themes a bit more strongly. I do also think, and I'm not being glib here, but I think very much this marks the end of the Hartnell era, this story. Because, like most notably at the end of it, you're losing Ben and Polly, who are our last link to that era. But it feels very much,
It's also got the TARDIS being carted away on the back of a lorry, so it kind of...
True. But, and it's immediately followed by Evil of the Daleks.
Which feels like the beginning of Troughton, as we know.
Which absolutely.
Deborah Watling, who
which
just
feels
died
like,
recently,
we're in a completely new cast. Yeah. We've got a completely new cast then from the Hartnell era. But the idea that, like you say, that Doctor Who would do something this weird. I mean, this feels weird and experimental and like it's trying something new. Whereas... most of the reason why I don't like certainly later period Troughton is that I think it very much just settles into that routine of... Yeah,
and it's quite possible this was written with Hartnell in mind, given how quickly the recasting happened.
Very probably, and I think, I'm sure he'd have done a very good job of it as well. But, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, my understanding is that, very, very aware of the fact that we very recently lost Deborah Watling, the actress who played Victoria. I think it's also fair to say that none of us have been certainly particularly keen on Victoria as a character construct. I don't think she's a companion that works. They're obviously trying to tee up Samantha Briggs in this, Pauline Collins, Shirley Valentine, as a potential future companion, aren't they?
Yeah, well, she was offered the role.
She was offered the role.
Yeah.
It's a shame, because that would have worked brilliantly.
I find her so irritating
really?
in this. Yeah.
I really like her. I think it's really sweet, and I think her
obnoxious.
relationship with Jamie...
She was offered the role?
Yeah. Would you like to stay on and be the next Doctor Who companion? And she had other stuff that she wanted to do. So,
wow.
Whether she'd have had the same career after doing probably a year as... Man, can you imagine her in Tomb of the Cybermen? It's just...
Yes, it would have been better.
Yeah, well, it's quite something, isn't it?
Can you imagine her in The Web of Fear? Yes, it would have been better. I think...
Yeah, because there's a great tradition of the companions. They keep up the sort of introduction story, and they keep that kind of theme going.
Absolutely,
through.
Well, she was more. She was definitely. I liked.
She's quite lively, at least. Yeah.
Well, yeah, she's go-getting and sort of self-starting.
And considering that, yes, self-starting.
And given they've introduced her with a Scouse accent, it would have stayed a Scouse accent.
Of course, wouldn't have gone through several different regions as the series went on. But I mean, I suppose it's just in contrast to the fact that Victoria is such a passive character. I mean, passive
and doesn't
to the
want to
point
be
of being
there
quite
at all.
offensive that they wrote this character as a female lead. The fact that, she's got a bit of agency, and I think the relationship with Jamie's really sweet.
Yeah, no, that's
I think it's really sweet, and that he has a little bit of romance with her. And also, I mean, Jamie's really great in this as well, because it's...
I love the bit of business where he's holding the foreign newspaper upside down.
Well, because it's that idea where they're still trying to grapple with which...
Is he an historical character, or he's just a contemporary man quite...
Exactly. It's like, is he a bloke or is he a historic character? And the idea that the beat that they settle on here is that, yes, he is freaked out by air travel and airports. And
does he call it a big iron beastie or something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That all of this stuff is new to him, but he is smart enough and resourceful enough to be able to adapt and process it, and then make reasoned decisions. I like all that stuff, and I think he's great in it.
I love it when the Doctor and Jamie go into the sort of infirmary area, and they get in under the ruse that Jamie's got a rare tropical disease. Yeah. And he pretends to be sick, and he's going, oh, and the Doctor said, don't overdo it. How am I doing, Doctor? You're doing fine, but don't overdo it. It's very
But I think
funny.
it makes really good use of the airport setting as well. I mean, the bit in one of the later episodes where they're touching base with Ben and they need to find a place where they can have a moment of quiet. And so they go into the photo booth and they're being interrupted by someone wanting to come in and have their passport photos taken, and they're having to pretend to be taking a group photo, and then it goes back out.
Yeah,
It's like,
that sort of jollies up an exposition scene.
yeah, I like
that.
that. This and that's the hallmark. You know, it's like we said. Like Malcolm Huck's a proper writer. He thinks about the details, and it's not just enough just to do a stock. Because I mean, let's face it. Like later Troughton is largely exposition. Is men in bases explaining things to each other.
Yeah.
The fact that he's a good enough writer to add these little beats.
Earlier this show, we reviewed Ark in Space, which has a sort of theme of aliens taking over bodies. This is a similar kind of, maybe not as visceral, but there is something very creepy about the chameleons.
Super creepy.
And it's not, I like the ambiguity of quite what they're doing. Are they just...
Yes.
Are they just sort of taking on the image of them, or...?
Yeah, I mean, I slightly flip... Cards on the table, having, I love this for its tone and its atmosphere, basically. I don't fully understand what the chameleons are up to. I don't know if either of you have got a better read on this than I do.
There was some sort of cataclysm on their planet which made them ill.
Lose their identities? I don't know.
And
It's been a few weeks now since I've watched this.
I mean,
and I get a bit mixed up with the
their Gmail accounts are all hacked and they lost their identities.
You get the impression there's nothing a decent dermatologist can sort out for them, but like apparently they need to. Yeah, no, our scientists developed a whiz-bang plan for us to be saved from the effects of our cataclysm, which involve us piloting a ship halfway across the galaxy and sort of cloning, but not cloning, like doubling.
So it's vague.
We've been doing it, but we've had to do a lot of research into contemporary tourism trends in Britain.
But not car park rates.
Yeah, and we've set up a actually quite successful...
yes, it's very much in demand.
Yeah.
With no clue in the title.
Business. And despite the fact that literally everyone who goes on one of these holidays disappears, we still have quite a lot of demand. Yeah, it's
not entirely clear, but it's there. I think, like I say,
but just as a horror trope,
I think so. But also in a good setting.
I hope they're atoll protected. Is what I'm saying.
For example, one of the shots. I mean, it's actually the sort of cliffhanging shot at the end of episode 1.
Yeah, it's great.
Where it's the two guys pulling the half-formed chameleon character, dragging him up the escalator, and it's done in a huge long shot. So you see that this is all being done on location. It's very silent. I thought that was wonderful. There's some great work. Was this a specially composed score, or is it our good friend Stocky at work?
Couldn't find any details about
came
this.
on board.
Stockhausen, yes. Stockhausen and Waterman. I have a feeling it may be stock music or a little bit of Radiophonica, but again, the music, which creates this sort of weird atmospheric droning, it's very much less is more. There's nothing dramatic about the music, but it creates these weird, unsettling atmospheres. The performances of a lot of the chameleons themselves, like, not so robotic as to be parody, but very much underplayed. I just think it has this...
the composer was Mr. Stock Music.
A Stock Music. He was earning a lot this year.
Nominative determinism.
It's this, this. I keep saying it, but this weird atmosphere of dread that this thing generates. Like, I love it. It just really hooked me.
I like the little freezer guns.
Yeah,
the little freezer guns are quite fun. I think I do agree with you, Matt. I think that the tone of it is it's this weird, slightly
uncanny.
Uncanny.
Things aren't quite as they should be.
Yeah, it's like everything's phased 1 second out or something. Yeah. It's like everything's a bit strange, realistic, and it feels real, but it feels otherworldly in a sort of strange.
Quite nasty as well.
Yeah, there's a sort of odd, a bit like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. A sort of odd kind of otherness that's still
Something's
the same.
Out of whack.
Yeah, something out of whack is a good way to put it. I agree that's and I think that absolutely happens and it absolutely lands, and I like the things they're doing, and it's creepy. It's not really making some big social commentary
as well,
but it's creepy and unpleasant, and what's better
Who's
than
job at the time,
exactly that's what Doctor Who should do. But it's for me, it's just a question of pacing and just tightening up the plot. Like, it's nothing an edit couldn't, in the same way that the chameleons just need a good dermatologist. I think a slight polish on the script, just tightening up some of those plot points, would probably make this top draw. But for me, it just doesn't quite. it doesn't quite grind together. But I agree the tone is great on this.
Would have been quite interesting to see. This is a Pertwee story. It feels a bit like the Autons in ways, doesn't it, with the sort of infiltration and
well, it's
whatnot.
interesting you mentioned that, because I was reading doing my intensive research by looking at the Wikipedia page for this, and it said that indeed this had been originally proposed as a Hartnell story, where it would be shop dummies.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so these things all come back around again.
Yeah. I
did mention earlier that one of the other Troughtons we'd reviewed, which I think we were all very impressed with, was the Macra Terror. Again, similar themes of mind control and that sort of thing. I think there was something in the air.
I think absolutely.
I mean, that's more of the sort of passive society, isn't it? Society's being kept down, whereas here it's this more ambiguous stealing of identity.
But I think also we talked, if I remember rightly, when we looked at the Macra Terror, about the prisoner as a point of comparison as well. And I think it's definitely these questions of individual identity and sort of collective identity, and the fact that your individuality may be something that may come under threat is like a very rich theme around this time. And that's, again, it's Doctor Who, which I love it when Doctor Who gets high off the fumes of contemporary culture. I think you see that a lot in the Pertwee era. You see that a lot in the Hartnell era. I love it when that happens, and it's why I'm slightly indulgent, even though the execution is always incredibly poor, of when the McCoy era tries to do it as well. I love it when Doctor Who tries to touch base with what's going on in culture, which is why I think I'm so down on a lot of 80s Who, and why I'm so down on later Troughton, which is so much about just setting up a formula that you can rinse and repeat every single week. And
even when it is contemporary, it's underground with Yeti. It's nothing to do with the actual...
It's like, exactly.
Well, I'm genuinely glad you enjoyed this, because I do, like I say, I think the stuff in the first season of Troughton, which is atypical, and that's what I kind of enjoy about it. So looking forward to us reviewing a few more things from that era.
Go straight over there.
Every day at Luton, over 100 passengers miss their flights.
Bye. No chance?
No, it's got an on-time slot, I'm afraid.
Some take it well.
Sorry, that's a no. Can't get you off.
And some don't.
No, really, you can't get on that flight. Oh, Christ. All right. Oh, calm down, calm down.
Michelle Salinger has arrived 15 minutes late for the morning flight to Barcelona.
So that about wraps it up for September. Any other business, gentlemen?
No.
No? Fair enough.
I don't think we've had any correspondence.
Don't think we've had any correspondence since we recorded the last episode. 1 month hence.
One whole month ago.
One whole month
from
ago.
feast to famine.
Time has flown by. Well, we would like to renew our correspondence, so if you have anything to say about any of the issues raised in this podcast,
if you've been affected by any of the issues,
talk to us about Doctor Who.
Have you had your DNA forcibly removed from you and then progeny created from it?
Send us a prefabricated postcard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. To hello@I'llExplainLater.com. That is our email address. @ExplainLaterPod. That is our Twitter feed. You can get in touch with us there. Facebook.com/I'llExplainLater. That's where you'll find us on the Facebook. And as always, reviews on iTunes, very much appreciated. Very kind. Gets people our way.
Please.
Tell other Doctor Who fans about this wonderful podcast you're listening to. We'll be back in October.
Yeah.
The spookiest month of the year. Ooh.
It certainly is. I can't remember what we were reviewing then.
No.
Even though
what a review!
Even though I got it on a Post-it note next to my computer at home.
I'm going to stick my neck out and say it's probably 3 more Doctor Who stories.
Well, it is. It's about time we had some Matt Smith in the middle.
Fair enough.
The Matt Smith sandwich.
Well, join us next month for that. But until then, good night.
Good night.
Adieu.
He's gonna steal your